we see a number of parties, a movement, if you will, to really shift away from all these foundational principles of a free and democratic society. And so, for example, there's a number of parties that seek to get rid of, frankly, freedom of speech, which is foundational. So, why is this movement happening? Do you have a theory about what the heck is going on in our country when you have these parties at the forefront of calling for an end, really, of freedom of speech?
Well, politicians never take away your rights and freedoms without offering a nice sounding pretext, right? So, in Germany, for example, Hitler promised to protect Germans from the threat of communism. And Germans were legitimately afraid of communism because the experiment had been horrific in Russia or the Soviet Union. Uh, the Germans were scared of it, and they had their own German Communist Party, which got as much as 17% of the vote in one of the elections. So it was not a fringe movement with 1 or 2% support. And so, but there's always we're going to keep you safe from the terrorists. So therefore, the government needs to read all your emails, because we got to find the terrorists, or we're going to save you from the dangerous impending climate holocaust that's going to happen, or it's public health. There's always a nice sounding pretext. So to take away freedom of speech, what the government says is we want to protect you and everybody else from hate. Hate is bad and nobody should be subjected to hate. So we're going to censor your speech to protect you from hate and to protect you from disinformation, because surely you're against disinformation, aren't you? I mean, everything, information should be accurate. So the government's going to take away your freedom of speech to protect you from disinformation. So those are the pretexts. Those who have studied history will see through that. And we've got quite a crisis on the education front, because there are many Canadians of all ages, but especially the younger ones, they know nothing of history. And when people are ignorant of history, you can convince them of anything.
Yeah, no, I think that's a high level, brilliant summation of what's going on here. But a lot of this boils down to one word. Is it control?
Some people argue that the most addictive thing that one could be addictive to is power. That's more addictive than alcohol or food or any drug or any chemical is the addiction to power. And we see this as well throughout history, that ideologues are not content to let other people live their lives as those other people deem best. The ideologue wants everybody shepherded like sheep into this big project, a project to whatever, for greater Germany or for the workers' paradise, or so yeah, control is a big part of it. Some people want to control other people. They're not happy letting other people choose their own priorities.
So, in the Canadian context in 2024, though, a lot of this, then, you would say, is driven by cynical kind of political imperatives to control and go after your ideological opponents. But also, it's driven by ideology as people try to build their kind of utopian idea. We hear constantly out of universities. I mean, this is where a lot of this originates from, among other places, is this drumbeat of oppressor versus victim. And so, almost like a kind of a worshiping of the world of victims. So, therefore, the law should be used to, well, drive certain outcomes that create equity, not justice, but equity. And so, is the law then being flipped on its head? So, instead of having the rule of law, it's rule by law to get certain objectives in favor of those groups that are seen as victims.
Yeah, this is neo-Marxist ideology, the woke social justice warrior, equity, diversity, inclusion. It's the new Marxism. The old Marxism said that we are, first and foremost, we are either oppressive, evil, capitalist bourgeoisie, or we are the oppressed victim, worker, laborer, proletariat. And all of society is about class struggle. And so you and I, as unique individuals created in the image of God, that either doesn't exist, or if it does, it's in a very distant second place. First and foremost, we've got this class warfare, group struggle that's going to go on and on until finally the bourgeoisie is vanquished by the proletariat.
Hmm.
Now, after 70 years, a lot of people were not buying into that, which is why you saw the Soviet Union collapsed in
Hmm.
1991. And, even in China, they pay lip service to it, but they're kind of, experimenting with capitalism under a ruthless dictatorship. But so the new Marxism it's still the same old class warfare, group warfare, but now instead of the capitalists versus the workers, now it is dark-skinned people versus light-skinned people, and men versus women, gay people versus straight people.
Hmm.
And it's all about oppression and victim and group warfare. And yes, there is a concerted effort to get all of our laws to align with this twisted, hateful, neo-Marxist ideology of the social justice warriors, the woke ideology of equity, diversity, inclusion.
No, it sounds really quite disturbing and frankly hateful, doesn't it? As they seek to divide people instead of emphasizing unity of principles, like we are all Canadians, joined by the principle of, well, things like the rule of law and our vision for building a country together. It's really about dividing a country.
I was just speaking with a professor at Simon Fraser University just the other day, and she told me that in the coming days, there's going to be advertisements posted for some positions at SFU saying only blacks should apply, and another one, only Aboriginals should apply. We've got the Toronto Metropolitan University, TMU, formerly Ryerson, and they, in their medical admissions program, have declared that 3/4 of the places in their medical program are to be reserved for equity, diversity, inclusion, affirmative action, uh, victim groups. And so 3/4 of the seats there have to be given to, you have to be either female or dark skinned or LGBTQ or Aboriginal or whatever. You cannot be light skinned or male. And this is posted on their website. This is their admissions policy at a
Wow.
taxpayer funded university in Ontario in 2024 under a government that calls itself conservative.
Isn't that remarkable? So instead of emphasizing merit, I don't know about you, but when I want like a surgeon, a cardiologist, I would want someone who's very capable, let alone a pilot. So it seems like, again, the kind of fundamental principles of our society are being flipped on its head. And it's not to say that there's not concerns about racism in our society, but I think Canada's fundamentally a good society. But this is something different. This is pursuing it almost in itself and putting aside, again, a vital principle of merit, all for the sake of an ideology that is based on kind of a nonsensical narrative. Is that right?
Well, and you see a similar ideology with the Aboriginal issues. You see this notion, which I think, frankly, is racist, which would say that uh, somebody whose Canadian ancestors living in Canada, going back 3 or 4 generations, should have different and inferior legal rights compared to somebody who can trace his Canadian ancestors living in Canada back 500 years or 1,000 years. And it's antithetical to the free society, and it's also it's not a recipe for reconciliation. If people have different legal rights based on their ancestry, their ethnicity, their descent, however you want to characterize it, but if you say, well, you can trace your ancestors living on this land, your ancestors go back only 2 generations, but his ancestors living on this land, he's got ancestry going back 10 generations, so he should have superior legal rights. Well, right there, you do not have reconciliation. You have a recipe for division.
Well, no, it's very concerning. So that again is another issue where there are a number of governments, certainly the federal one and select provinces, that are pursuing reconciliation. And of course, everyone wants to live peacefully with all peoples, but reconciliation then in that context is really a recipe for dividing people, and based all on perceptions of race and wrongdoing that could have happened hundreds of years ago, if at all.
Yeah. A friend of mine who's my age, I came to Canada from the Netherlands at the age of 7, and he came to Canada from Germany at the age of 5. And so his grandparents and my grandparents would have been on opposite sides in a war. And considering the popularity of Hitler's National Socialists, statistically, chances are that 2 out of 4 of his grandparents actually voted for the Nazis. And my grandparents, all 4 of them, suffered horrifically under a Nazi occupation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he and I can be friends in Canada in 2024 only because we're not living in the past. And I don't go up to him and say, well, you owe me money because your grandparents were either directly or indirectly responsible for the grave injustice perpetrated against my grandparents. My grandparents suffered because of your grandparents. Therefore, you owe me money. That would be a disaster. And, we can recognize that as pretty obvious when you talk about, my friend and I, but it's the same principle that applies to Aboriginals, non-Aboriginals, that if to the extent that injustices were perpetrated, and people will debate whether that was a small extent or a medium extent or large extent, but to whatever extent injustices were perpetrated 100 years ago, you cannot have reconciliation today if we are saying, well, your great 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 grandfather did evil things to my great 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 grandfather, so you owe me money today. It's like, no, that doesn't work for that. That's not how you get reconciliation.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, John, and certainly it's amazing how there's different groups promoting the use of, say, Aboriginal land acknowledgements, or referring to people who've been here for generations or even recently as Canadians as white settlers. My thesis here today, John, with you, is that there's a whole pattern of action by this federal government, let alone other provinces, that are really undermining the rule of law. And on the same token, I think it's interesting how we have the whole world of professions that seem to have been infected by this type of pernicious, hateful thinking. We have, for example, the psychologists, the Association of Psychologists of Ontario going after Jordan Peterson. You've got numerous examples where, well, you've got Bill 21 in the province of BC that are trying to basically control law societies. Time and time again, you've got this, again, effort to control professions. And that's a privilege. Professions are set up in a particular way. They're granted special powers to self-govern by governments. Is it time that those governments start withdrawing that power to regovern, or with certain conditions that get rid of this endless chant of diversity, equity, inclusion?
They have turned themselves into woke, politically correct regulators of speech. In British Columbia, we've seen an example with registered nurse Amy Ham stating publicly that there's only 2 genders. Women are entitled to their own safe spaces like bathrooms, change rooms, locker rooms, female-only prisons, female-only sporting events. And for saying this in public, she gets prosecuted by the British Columbia College of Nurses and Midwives. Jordan Peterson getting prosecuted by his college. I know the Law Society in Alberta went after a lawyer who stated on Facebook or Twitter that Black Lives Matter is a Marxist organization. He also
Which
said
it is. That's how they self-describe themselves.
How dare you? How dare you? And saying he also said that we should select judges based on merit, and we should not have quotas for how many female appointments. And the Law Society of Alberta went after this lawyer over that. it's just outrageous. So we have to either make it so that you don't need to be a member of it. And the colleges of physicians and surgeons, just horrific, interfering in the doctor-patient relationship, disciplinary proceedings launched against doctors who want to do what medicine has done for centuries, which is to have debate as a means of arriving at truth. And so what government needs to do is either say, you don't need to be a member of one of these bodies in order to practice your profession, or rein them in and change the legislation to make sure that they cannot oppress their own members.
Indeed. Well, I'm with you, John. We've had a far-reaching conversation about frankly, the attack on the rule of law, and how, if you look at this carefully, there's pattern after pattern of an undermining of the rule of law, and we cannot take that for granted in this country. So, John, I want to thank you so much for your leadership and your courage, for your work at the Justice Center, for working at these issues, and for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on your show. Have a great rest of the day.
Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.